Aatrox, the Destroyer of Worlds, a title that would strike fear in the most stalwart of champions. But he was not always this way. For long ago, in a civilization that has vanished since, there was an enormous gilded city, grand in its design, sprawling across the desert. It was a veritable oasis, with monuments as tall as mountains and a sun disk of colossal size watching over the city at the center, from which their famed ascended warriors drew their strength. And the mightiest of these warriors was named Aatrox. His wings were made of golden light, and his armor sparkled like a constellation of hope. He was at the vanguard of every noble conflict. So true and just was his conduct that other god warriors would always gather at his side. So when help was needed to stifle a rebellion in Acacia, Aatrox appeared perfectly equipped to face it. So with a great sword weighted by his side and an army 10,000 strong, with several of the kingdom's mightiest warriors, he was the first to lead the charge. But no one predicted the desperation and horrors that the rebels would unleash. The Void, a corrupting dark force, ancient beyond time, with only one goal: the annihilation of everything that has a soul. The rebels, in the foolishness of their desperation, would unleash the Void on Acacia. It quickly overwhelmed those who dared to summon it, and proceeded to ravage everything in its path, annihilating all life it encountered. After many years of desperate battle, Aatrox and his ascended brothers would eventually halt the Void's advances. Yet in the end, the terror that was their armies could only be stifled with the sacrifice of the entire city. Such was the power of their unholy abominations and the resilience of the Void. Searing the largest rifts shut, the surviving Ascended had been forever changed by what they had encountered. Though Shurima had triumphed, they all had lost something in their victory, even noble Aatrox. The horrors they witnessed and a sickness of their very soul they seemed to have contracted while facing the Void took a toll on their humanity. They would all return to Shurima, where soon after it was decided that their Grand Emperor Azir would face the Ascension Ritual to become one of the Sunborn warriors. Although at the height of this ritual, his closest friend Zerath would unleash forbidden magic, and Azir would be blasted from his very place on the dais, where the traitor would take his place, the light filling him with power as he roared with his mortal body, beginning to transform. But the magic of the ritual was not intended for him, and such powerful celestial magic cannot simply be diverted. The power of the Ascension Ritual exploded outwards, devastating Shurima and laying waste to the entire city. Its people burned to ash, and its towering monuments fell to ruin as the desert sands swallowed the sky. The sun disk sank, and what had taken centuries to build was brought to ruin in an instant by one man's misplaced hate. All that remained of Shurima were sunken ruins and echoes of its people's screams on the night winds. With no emperor to lead them, many of the surviving Ascended began to falter their purpose as their old petty ambitions resurfaced. They taught themselves forbidden sorceries, and their pride would overtake them as they came to view themselves as the rightful inheritors of the world. The scattered mortal populace named these new tyrants Darkin, a whispered curse translating roughly in the old tongue as the Fallen. The malcontented god warriors and the armies they had raised were unstoppable, and entire nations would be crushed by them. It seemed as though this would be the end of all living things. And fearing this, the Targonians would intervene. They would go to the aspect of Twilight Miesha, an ancient trickster being, a celestial of sorts, with blonde hair and a youthful appearance. She was more powerful than any from the terrestrial plane, and she would go to this Darkin leader and convince him that the only way to eliminate the bloodshed between his brothers was to find a way to become mortal again, playing on the residual remnant of humanity dormant within him. But this was all a ruse. She taught Tanare a unique form of magic to siphon the power of his kin, but once the Darkin were gathered, she used a celestial weapon called the Shalakar to focus the celestial fire of the moon, effectively stripping the Darkin of their physical forms. She had a cold, almost sadistic enjoyment as she watched the gods scream and writhe in agony. She would show the mortals how to use this celestial magic to bind a darkened soul into their very weapons, and with the help of the aspect of war, they would lead the armies of Targon against the Darkin, acting as a distraction so the sealing rituals could be completed. Never fearing any foe, Aatrox and his armies were ready, and he realized only too late that they had been deceived. A force greater than 1,000 dying suns pulled him inside the sword that he had carried into battle countless times, and forever bound his immortal essence to it. The weapon was a prison, sealing his consciousness in suffocating eternal darkness, robbing him even of the ability to die. For centuries he would strain against this hellish confinement, binding him like a cocoon, until some nameless mortal was foolish enough to try and wield the blade. Aatrox would seize this opportunity, forcing his will and an imitation of his original form onto this bearer. But he would only achieve a grotesque mockery of his original glory. Once, long ago, he was shaped by the stars, a purity of holy aspect, light and reason given shape, defending this world in the greatest battles ever known. But now, blood and ichor drips from this stolen flesh as it decays, the muscles and bones struggling, tearing, and protesting the abomination he had become. But this cannot be the end. He was too mighty a warrior, too grand a general. He was a god among mortals. They are not worth his compassion. This new form, a shameful cage only slightly larger than the sword. The heavenly powers that Aatrox once embodied have been wiped from the world in all memory. Raging against this injustice, he would make them all pay for this loss, his loss of reverence, his loss of power, his loss of freedom. He would end all existence for daring to take away his rightful godhood, and he would become a reaper of souls. He would embrace the final oblivion that he had fought against. And after all of this, I've noticed a parallel to another story. A story of the fallen angel, the morning star, Lucifer. In Ezekiel 28, it says that Lucifer was the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in his beauty. His home was on the holy mountain of God, with coverings of precious stones and gold craftsmanship in the seams, holy in his ways, until iniquity was found within him. He saw his own beauty, realizing he was the strongest and most elegant of the archangels. Pride would take hold of his heart, corrupting his wisdom and all good in him. For the sake of his own splendor, filling himself with violence, he said he will exalt his throne above the stars of God, that he will become God. So war broke out in heaven. Michael, the archangel of war, with legions of angels behind him, fought Lucifer, and they would prevail. So God cast him down to the earth from the midst of the fiery stones, and called him the devil. In both narratives, the characters begin as the most beautiful and powerful of their kind. Lucifer, the archangel of worship, known as the morning star. He stood as the highest among the angels, a being of light, wisdom, and perfection, who stood closest to the throne of God. Aatrox, a sunborn, the most noble and honored of the Shreemen ascended. He possessed magnificent golden wings and was the paragon of virtue, leading the armies of light against the darkness of the void. And the fall of Aatrox, much like the fall of Lucifer, is a case of extreme pride and what can happen when a being considers themselves too great for the world they serve, their very excellence becoming the catalyst for their destruction. When the Shreemen Empire fell, Aatrox could not accept a world where he was no longer a worshipped being. Instead of grieving or helping the mortals, his pride demanded he remain a ruler, leading directly into the Darkin War. And even as the Darkin corrupted themselves with heretic magic, Aatrox still viewed himself as a god. This made Aatrox vulnerable to deception, for he viewed mortals and the aspects of Targon as lesser beings. He would have never have expected that they could outsmart him. The most painful part of this downfall was his current existence, because he still sees himself as that divine warrior of Shurima, and because of this, he finds his current body repulsive and beneath him. Aatrox's pride is so wounded by his imprisonment that he would see to it all of existence be destroyed as vengeance for loss of his previous godhood, becoming and embodying the very thing he opposed in Acathia all those years ago.